I'm happy to introduce Dr. Lucas Dropa to you all today. Dr. Dropa leads sustainability at Microsoft as the company's first chief environmental officer. In this role, he works to advance Microsoft's core commitment to sustainability through ongoing technological innovation, program development, policy advancement, and global operational excellence. With a combined background in both environmental science and data science, Dr. Dropa is committed to using the power of advanced technology to help transform how society monitors, models, and manages Earth's natural resources. He is the founder of Microsoft's Artificial Intelligence for Earth program in 2017, which is a 5-year, $50 million cross-company effort dedicated to delivering technology-enabled solutions to global environmental challenges. He holds a PhD in ecology from Duke University, has published extensively in leading academic journals, serves as an advisor on numerous boards. And prior to his current role, Dr. Dropa was Microsoft's chief environmental scientist and led research programs at the intersection of environmental and computer sciences in Microsoft research. And he remains an active scientist and one of Microsoft's foremost artificial intelligence leaders. So without further ado, Dr. Dropa.
Okay, and I just want to notify everybody that we're proud to recruit Dr. Dropa as adjunct professor in the Department of Environmental Health Sciences. It's a process that's ongoing, and with a plan also to give him a secondary appointment after that with the Yale School of the Environment. Lucas, thank you so much for accepting this invitation, both for joining the department and of course giving us the seminar. Podium is yours. I'm setting my microphone.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for the introduction. Peter, is really nice to chat with you a bit beforehand as well. I hate starting talks with apologies, but I really do apologize that I'm not able to be there in person. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. We've rescheduled. If I knew I was supposed to give this talk, I think last year, if I knew that that the rescheduling that we did was going to mean that I wouldn't be able to attend in person, I probably would have moved everything possible to have been able to make it out there. So. But I do think that, you know, the reason that I'm not able to attend the pandemic that this talk is happening in the middle of is actually a good reason for us to have this conversation, have a conversation about public health, about the environment, and about technology. I would just say that I probably, you know, if I had to stack rank my level of, you know, education and expertise, it goes environment, technology, public health. I think probably some of you on the call maybe would reverse that order. So I really enjoy these types of conversations. And if you do have a question, just raise your hand. If I don't see it, Ying will chime in and interrupt me, and we'll get on track. I'll try to keep this kind of flowing and conversational if possible, and we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So let me just share my presentation here. Okay. Ian, can you just confirm you can see? Perfect. Okay. Well, let's get this going. I titled this talk "Computing a More Sustainable Future," really because that's kind of the mission that I've been on actually since I finished. Well, since I kind of took on my PhD studies at Duke. I think, you know, I started asking a lot of big questions. I don't mean that like I had big ideas. I meant literally the questions themselves were being asked at a big scale. And what became so clear to me is that all of what seemed to be the important questions that I was reading in the literature, I was hearing about in seminars and conferences, were about the health of the planet, about how the health of the planet influenced the health of human populations, and how good we are, if at all, at protecting the health of the planet and predicting the impacts of our human activities on Earth's natural systems than on human systems. And that if we were going to be able to do our science at the scale that we need to be able to answer those questions, that computing is going to play an incredibly important role in that scaling function. And so that's how I ended up at Microsoft. I joined Microsoft Research as a computational ecologist. I became the first chief environmental scientist, and I'm now the chief environmental officer overseeing all of our sustainability work. I'm not actually going to cover kind of a lot of the rest of my job, which is overseeing sustainability. I'm going to talk more about, particularly about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and specifically, and ways that we can deploy that to do a better job of monitoring, modeling, and then ultimately managing Earth's natural systems. So I just want to start by level setting, which is that, when it comes to the natural world, we know a lot about a little and a little about a lot, right? That's pretty clear. We know pretty much every species of bird on Earth, for instance, but we know that we only have identified maybe 10% of all life on Earth. We know certain populations down to the specific individual, but we know there's millions of species that we've not even discovered one individual of. And so we have research plots that we track every leaf in, and then we have entire geographies on this planet, and particularly underneath the oceans, where humans have never been, or have been very rarely, and have collected very little information about. You can contrast that to what we know about people, which is just a lot. We know a lot about people and very little about the rest of life on Earth. But knowing a lot about a little and a little bit of about a lot is difficult if we're going to ask some of the fundamental questions that we do need to ask when it comes to environmental health and public health. And that's really this kind of simple phrasing here, is what we need to know is what is where, how much is there, and how fast is it changing. That's ultimately kind of what we need to understand, so that we can have a societal conversation about what could be there and what should be there, right? That's, because we do have a lot of management requirements, and we need to ask those questions. What should be there, which is predicated on what could be there, which is predicated on understanding what is where and how much is there and how fast is it changing. And as I said kind of at the beginning of my talk, there's a big opportunity here, I think, for the technology sector and the deployment of technology more generally to have a big impact in helping answer all of those questions that were on the previous slide. We're talking about some of the biggest data challenges on Earth, some of the biggest compute challenges on Earth. If you're talking about trying to collect and analyze data about the planet, if you're talking about trying to compute and model and make predictions about data at that scale. This happens to represent some of the biggest markets on Earth, the natural resource markets, the public health markets, all of the health markets, et cetera. And it represents what I believe to be the most existential challenge of our species on Earth, which is ensuring a more environmentally and thus socially sustainable future for us all. And so I just want to start. I'm going to basically talk about one thing that we're working on at Microsoft, and then I'm going to expand out to it, what that specific example is indicative of more generally. And this first example that I'm going to talk about is actually the work of a team, a partner team inside Microsoft. They sit inside of our kind of R&D division, led by a friend and close collaborator of mine named Ethan Jackson. And what Ethan, and I remember getting an email from Ethan way before I knew him. This is the first time we'd ever been in touch. He sent me an email because he knew I was an ecologist inside Microsoft Research, and he comes from a more formal computer science background, but had really been thinking about disease modeling, epidemiology, how we actually get out ahead of some disease epidemics, pandemics. When I got this email from him years ago, we weren't, having the conversation in the middle of a pandemic. So I think, basically everything I've heard Ethan say and his team say has been amazingly prescient for the way things have gone. But the original pitch that Ethan was making is that, look, disease epidemics are the most catastrophic events in recorded history. And they're catastrophic because they're unpredictable and because they can impact across all of our entire social systems. But that unpredictability and that scalability of impacts comes together once in a while to create, these terribly catastrophic events. And, I'm not telling you all anything that you don't already know, but, if we just go back and we look at Ebola and Zika and MERS, there's significant human health impacts and significant economic costs, extremely significant costs. And these are coming from the unanticipated nature of these events. The fact that we have no prediction or no ability to foresee. And what's so interesting about all of these, from my perspective as an ecologist, is that they all come from animals in the environment, right? We care about them because of the human impacts, but they come from the natural world. And so if we're going to have some sort of predictive capacity about our own health systems, then we're going to have to better understand the natural world and how those two things come together. And so what Ethan and his team decided to do was to really take one example and see if they could build out an end-to-end solution for better monitoring the biome to inform public health. And what they decided to, what they asked themselves is, well, if you go back to that previous slide and you say, well, all of these public health challenges from an epidemic's perspective come from the natural world, how do you sample the natural world? And how do you build an end-to-end sampling system over the natural world? What they quickly realized is that, biology and evolution has already provided the building blocks of that sampling system. Evolution has already built a sampling system, right? Biting insects really do that job for us. They fly around, they sample the environment, they collect data through DNA and RNA, and then and that's what they do. And so if we can insert ourselves into that sampling process, we can take advantage of the scale that biology already offers us and just insert a technology sampling solution in a very precise, efficient way to allow us to gain insights across entire ecosystems. And so what the team started to do is really to ask, well, okay, well then how would you sample the samplers, right? How would you effectively get out there and collect the data from the data collectors, from mosquitoes and other blood-sucking and biting insects? And what they decided was that you'd start with a smart trap, right? You have to sample the samplers, you have to collect those biting and blood-sucking insects, and you have to do that in a fairly new way, because the ways that folks have been doing it in the past, basically putting out, maybe a CO2 canister to attract mosquitoes into a bag, and then coming out and collecting that bag, and then having entomologists sit and try to sort out a bunch of dried or desiccated insects that have been all broken apart to figure out which ones are which, and then to be able to find ones that might still have some analyzable genetic material within them is a really long, laborious, and costly process. And so what they did is they kind of went to the lab drawing board, and they decided to put together an entirely new trap system. These are just some of the specifications of it. But what's so interesting, I think, is the fact that they were able to kind of completely redesign a system that has been in place for at least 100 years, and that's a system for collecting and analyzing insects of public health importance. And so what they ended up doing is they ended up building this new completely robotic mosquito trap. They built it in a state-of-the-art lab that we have at Microsoft. And they were able to start understanding the way in the lab that insects interacted with the trap, with the robotic trap. And so what you're seeing here are machine learning inferred tracks from computer vision inside the lab as this trap is sitting there looking to lure mosquitoes in with CO2 and other attractants. And we can track mosquitoes in the X, Y, and Z or Z dimensions, right? And we can see how they explore the trap, and we can continually refine our overall trap design to ensure that it's as effective as possible, all in the lab, but in a very natural environment. What I'm not showing here are photos of the lab. What's really cool about it, I think, is that it's completely tunable to any ecosystem on Earth. So basically, you can go and drop a pin on a map of where you want the lab to simulate that ecosystem, and it will simulate the diurnal cycles. It will simulate temperature and humidity and precipitation and all of those things, so that we can be exploring the way that insects explore this trap in the type of environment where the trap will actually be deployed. And then we can start putting it out in the field and see how it works. We can put it out and we can use different sensors and all different ways of collecting, of attracting insects to our collection mechanism. And so these are some super early results. This is actually Ethan, the guy behind the project and close collaborator of mine. So early on, they deployed this trap in Houston, just 87 experiments, 19 hours of data. What was really per experiment, and what was so interesting was just the scale of data that they were able to collect about mosquitoes and their environments. It scales completely beyond anything that had ever been done. I mean, you know, in just 87 experiments, you had 20 gigabytes of mosquito behavior data, over 20,000 mosquito events detected, and 8 different dimensions of the data that we were able to collect. So the time, the biotic and abiotic factors, et cetera. We're able to collect 9 different species. And what happens with this trap is that mosquitoes or other biting insects fly into it. There's a machine learning classifier inside that's running inside each of the 64 cells on the trap, and a LED that allows a camera to be able to pick up the shadow of the wing beat frequency and classify whatever insect has flown into that specific cell of that trap down to the species at a millisecond level scale. So a trap is luring mosquitoes or other species of insects. Insects fly in. Within 1 to 2 milliseconds, the camera has identified what species of insect that is and has made a decision whether or not it wants to capture that insect, and closes a door, and then keeps that specimen for later downstream genetic analysis. And what was really interesting, you see some results here, is we're able to build some really precise classifiers just with wing beat and time of day of what types of insects were coming into the trap. And then we can use gene sequencing and metagenomics. I think there's, I sent through some papers. I'm not going to get into technical details of those papers. I appreciate you reading them in advance. To be able to then take the genetic information that those individuals that we've just collected represent and plow those through a statistical kind of cloud scale computing platform, so that then we can not just understand, well, what is that species we just caught, but what are all the species in the ecosystem that individual insect has been feeding on, and what diseases might those species be carrying. And so what we were able to do is to take, to really scale up one of the most successful metagenomic algorithms out there, SNAP, on Microsoft's cloud, Azure, run new probabilistic mixture models on those to then assign all of this genetic material to the tree of life. And, you know, if you do that using synthetic data, we have almost a 100% accuracy, recovery accuracy. And on the real biological data that we're analyzing, we're at about 97% accuracy in placing novel viruses into the correct family and novel chordates in their correct family. So above 90%, up to, you know, above 95% ability to collect a mosquito, capture its collected genetic materials, and then be able to identify both chordates and the viruses that those chordates are carrying in the broader ecosystem. And then you can make some pretty interesting visualizations that just allow you to start, you know, taking all of the technical complexity that goes into doing all of this, and you can just quickly explore the tree of life and get it down to something as simple as like a Wikipedia page. Here is a rock dove that that's being discovered in this video that one of the mosquitoes that we collected had fed upon. And so this kind of end-to-end biome surveillance approach, this technology, is one that I think is an approach that I think that we need to really pursue more deeply as we think about the way that we monitor, model, and manage Earth's natural systems in order to better manage our human health systems. And what I think is interesting about this is that, and potentially replicable about it, is that there's an acknowledgement that biology and evolution, you know, the evolution and the biology that it has delivered can be seen as data in and of itself, and that the technology that humans build probably isn't scalable enough or efficient enough to do the job that evolution and biology have already done. But if we can be clever, that the technology that humans are good at building and deploying can be successfully coupled with those biological systems to really change the way that we kind of peer into these natural worlds that we're gonna have to understand much better if we are going to be able to put and then keep healthy 10 billion people on planet Earth. And so this was one of the early projects that we funded and fostered through a program that we started inside Microsoft called AI for Earth. And so AI for Earth was really a program that, you know, just as a little bit of a backstory, I joined Microsoft as a computational ecologist in 2010. Straight out of my PhD, I started as a postdoc there. And my job was to really think about the role that computing would play 50 years out, 30 to 50 years into the future. What were going to be the big trends in computing and in society, and particularly for me, at the intersection of environmental and computer science. So I was one of a few people thinking about that intersection. Most of my colleagues inside Microsoft Research were really thinking about AI and artificial intelligence, the machine learning techniques that serve as its foundation, and what that was going to do, and what the technologies we needed to innovate in that space were. And in about 2015, two things, 2015, 2016, a couple things became quite apparent, I think, to everybody, inside Microsoft, at least, which is that all of the things that we thought were 30 to 50 years out from an AI perspective, were not 30 to 50 years out. They were 3 years out. And at the same time, we had this joint realization that all the things that we thought were 30 to 50 years out from a computer science and environmental science perspective weren't 30 to 50 years out either. They were 3 years out. And so we did a lot in the company, investing, taking artificial intelligence, investments that we've been making in peer research and just driving them straight into our core business lines, and really started to saturate all of our product portfolio with the output of the AI research that we'd been doing. And then also on the environmental side, we decided that it was time to accelerate that work as well. And so I wrote a memo actually called AI for Earth, talking about how we should invest in this space. And that memo became this 5-year, $50 million commitment that we made to this new program called AI for Earth, that really, it focused on the deployment of machine learning approaches to work in climate, water, biodiversity, and agriculture. And it had these 3 kind of pillars, 3 principles and belief systems. The first is that, you have to appreciate the fact that the world's environmental organizations generally aren't some of the most well-funded organizations in the world, and that budget really couldn't be a barrier. We had to break that budget barrier down to empowering environmental organizations to use machine learning approaches. And so we put in place a grants program to make sure that anybody that wanted to use our technology could do so for free. We also had to recognize that, the world's top environmental scientists often don't graduate from the world's top computer science departments. They graduate from the world's top environmental science departments. And even though I've been arguing in the literature and in academia for quite a while that we need to do a much better job of integrating environmental and computer science from an educational curriculum perspective, we're still a long way from having that be a reality. And so we put in place a way for our collaborators to get direct education on technology from Microsoft. We put in place in-person, multi-day AI for Earth summits, and online curricula as well, to help increase the kind of the technical capacity of organizations around the world. And then also a belief that, Microsoft has some of the world's top machine learning experts and data scientists, and that if we're not putting them to work on this, then we're probably not leaning in as much as we possibly should. And so we built up a data science team to support this work as well. We started with nothing about 2 years ago, and since then we've funded almost 700 or over 650, let's call it, projects in more than 95 countries around the world, all of which are in some way taking a machine learning first approach to trying to solve environmental challenges. And what's so interesting for me about the 95 countries is that, not that this is a numbers game, but it's that environmental challenges manifest themselves fundamentally differently in space and time. And one way that you understand the diversity of that challenge portfolio is by collaborating with organizations in all these different places. And so that's what we really concentrated on. This AI for Earth program actually then became the template for several $100 million worth of programs inside Microsoft that all kind of sit now under an AI for Good kind of mandate: AI for Earth, AI for accessibility, AI for health, AI for humanitarian action, and AI for cultural heritage. So it's been an interesting journey to watch this go. But what I want to just maybe if I can get this to go. There we go. I just want to run through some specific examples of the work that we're interested in, and then we can kind of have a conversation about work that you all are interested in. So, you know, we fund academic organizations, we fund nonprofit organizations, we work closely with governmental and intergovernmental organizations. We're pretty much organizational classification agnostic in the types of folks that we work with, as long as we think that what they're doing has the potential to make a significant difference and to scale. And so, you know, this is actually one of the earlier projects that we got involved with. A researcher named Africa Flores at University of Alabama was super interested in HABs, harmful algal blooms, and these things are harmful both for people, or sorry, for animals and for people. I think these are when, you know, algal blooms become so ubiquitous that they deplete water bodies of oxygen and cause significant kind of toxic downstream impacts. And this is another area where we have very little predictive ability about when harmful algal blooms are going to happen, so that we can get out ahead of them to try to try to stop them from happening, but also so that we can understand from a planning perspective how to help mitigate them, ensure that people and nature are protected from systems that are going through a harmful algal bloom event. And it's been really interesting to see the significant advances they've been able to make, Africa's team's been able to make on modeling out and predicting algal blooms in particularly Lake Atitlan in the Guatemalan highlands. But their approach is scaling to water bodies well beyond that. The Vector Center is one that's quite interesting to us as well, because it's a very different type of machine learning. With the Vector Center and their perception reality engines, is that they call it, is they kind of take this two-part approach where they try to estimate the reality of any particular water stress in any particular region. And then they do a lot of natural language, and they do that through satellite remote sensing and other sensor-based work. But then they also do a lot of natural language processing on media and government reports to be able to understand the sentiment analysis of what's going on, to be able to identify the gap between perception of environmental crises and reality. And then they work really hard to educate the public, educate organizations and governments to close that perception reality gap through dashboards like kind of what you're seeing here, but also through other communication means. Is staying in the water space. One organization, actually a collaboration of organizations that we've been working with a lot lately, is the Freshwater Trust, an organization that's looking to protect and preserve freshwater resources across the United States and upstream tech, a really interesting tech startup that focuses on social good. If you don't know either of those two organizations, I would highly recommend looking them up. And one of the things that they're really working on together is how do you scale up the ability for people to invest in water replenishment projects? And when you do invest in water replenishment projects that ensure that more water goes back into the local aquifer than was taken out, how do you figure out what the optimal, most efficient investments are? And these large-scale geospatial optimization routines can often take a long time and can be expensive to run. And so what we've been working with them on is, in California, a project where we've been looking across almost 2 million acres and drive that optimization process down to minutes instead of months. to be able to help them make investment recommendations to the government and markets more generally. High tide intelligence, a similar effort, simply trying to help people, homeowners and property owners and other asset owners, understand the economic impacts of rapidly rising sea level and sea level induced flooding, and then as well the economic costs of the health impacts of those flooding events. And Breeze Technology doing a very similar thing, but from an air pollution perspective, air pollution being one of, if not many days, the most, as many of you know, deadly environmental challenge from a human perspective. It's an issue that we still don't have great information about, and so Breeze is taking sensors on the ground, large-scale remote sensing data sets, and marrying them up with a machine learning approach to be able to fill in the data gaps and then make predictions about where large pollution events may be happening, so that, again, government officials can get out ahead and try to minimize the health impacts of that. And I'll just skip through these last two, but I would just say that this all, from my perspective, those are all super interesting application areas, super interesting organizations. I kind of see it as my job and as Microsoft's job to produce and provide the building blocks that make all of those organizations work as effective and scalable as possible. And so when I think about the infrastructure that's needed there, I think about kind of these 5 pillars. We need, as Microsoft, we need to help curate the world's large, most important environmental data sets. So we need to provide the compute platform and resources to be able to crunch through all of that information. We need the specific algorithmic infrastructure or frameworks, things like deep neural networks and other application or other approaches like that. We need to be able to ensure that those frameworks can run on the compute substrate that we have, or sorry, on the compute infrastructure and the data substrate that we have as quickly and as cheaply as possible. And then once those algorithms have been trained, we need to be able to ensure that those organizations can deploy the kind of the trained algorithm as a scalable application programming interface or API. All so that it can then be ultimately ingested into an end user specific application, like many of those that we were talking about. And that we need to focus on a few key areas. When I think about conservation, environmental management, and ecosystem assessments, I really break things down into what I think of as the 4 kind of key pillars of conservation. There's classification, the what is where, how much is there. There's the forecasting, and the classification and how fast it's changing. There's the forecasting, which is what could be there. And then there's the planning for what should be there and how could you most efficiently put that there. And then the attribution, which is, given that we've now taken an action, that I paid some money, made an investment, changed a policy, did that actually have any impact on the outcome? Some of you that are taking, econometrics or other kind of statistical classes will be thinking about, additionality and matching and counterfactual estimation and all of that stuff in the attribution. When you're thinking about planning, maybe those of you who have taken some optimization courses know what I'm talking about there. In the conservation space, they talk about it as conservation planning. There's entire journals about it. Classification is a much more kind of basic statistical and machine learning process, as is forecasting. But for all of that to come together on scalable technology platforms, that for me is the most important thing that a Microsoft can do, and that's what we're trying to do. As you can see, we're trying to build this kind of this overall ecosystem of technology to support the work of all different types of organizations. And the way that I think about it, the way that I talk about it really is that the world needs a planetary computer. And, you know, that when you think about it, you need a computer that operates at a planetary scale in pursuit of solutions to building a sustainable future for the planet. And one of the easiest ways to think about, you know, what that might do is to think about what, you know, kind of the ultimate optimization problem actually is, which is if you say, well, every square meter of land and water on Earth has some, you know, not infinite, but large potential utilities that it could provide. And if we then were able as a society to understand what we actually wanted all of our natural resources to provide in order to best support our human societies, technology and a platform like a planetary computer, like what we're building at Microsoft, would be well placed to drive the decision-making process, not the decision itself, but the decision-making process that would help us get there. And, you know, I would just end this with kind of the perspective. A lot of people ask me why Microsoft is doing all of this. And I think, you know, for me, it gets down to, and this is of course just one of the things that we're doing in the sustainability space, but it's so important because I think we really do have this belief system that for Microsoft to do well, we need the world to do well. That's like as simple as that. We are a massive global organization that will, you know, rise and fall with the rest of the world. And, you know, as a business, we want to keep rising, and to do that, we need the world to keep improving. And it's just extremely apparent that if the world doesn't get out ahead of climate change and its other environmental issues, it's not going to do well. And that's a problem for Microsoft. So with that, I thought I'd just say thank you. I think we're kind of on time for about 15 minutes of questions. So, but Ying, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
I think Emily has a question. Emily, would you like to?
Yeah, hi. Thank you for your talk. Your slides are really, really beautiful, actually, as I would expect.
Well, they're the one bit I didn't make, so
okay. There you go. So I guess I have kind of a two-part question. And the first is, I think last year I read an article which kind of discussed like the energetic cost of training AI and how huge that is. And so I was kind of wondering how you handle this sort of cost benefit analysis of, is it worth more to spend energy training AI in hopes that we say protect something else? Yep. And then if so, in your team, do you have sort of this like ethical or philosophy expert in sort of your group to kind of provide that insight? Like I know Patagonia has that sort of ethical person to go to as far as like their manufacturing process is concerned. So I'm just curious like how Microsoft handles those sort of questions. And it may be more relevant like in the health space where we're dealing with like personal data and stuff. But anyway.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and it's a multi-layered question. So like most good questions are. So let's start at the beginning. There's a couple things when you think about training machine learning algorithms. And first and foremost, I would say that, you know, let's split it into kind of the infrastructure that algorithm runs on, and then to what end is that algorithm running, right? Why are you doing it? And so let's start on the infrastructure side, because, you know, like it or not, people are going to run these things, and we want to make sure that they are doing so kind of with infrastructure that out of the box ensures that the outcome is kind of as sustainably driven as possible. It's why it was in large part behind a lot of our corporate commitments that we made over the past year. So we announced over the course of 12 months, basically our suite of 2030 commitments, which would take me forever to get through all of them. But the high level is that Microsoft will be a carbon negative, water positive, zero waste company by 2030. And we'll build the infrastructure, this planetary computer that I was talking about. And that carbon negative part is important, in particular, the 100% renewable energy commitment that we're making for our data centers, because if you're going to run these, you want to ensure that the energy that's powering them is coming from renewable sources. So we try to cover ourselves on that. The second bit is when you think about how you accelerate these algorithms, you want them to run for as little time as possible, right? And so what a lot of the industry's been doing is developing custom silicon for custom algorithms. Right? So we say, hey, we have some big breakthrough, some big, the statisticians have some great breakthrough, and they're like, whoa, did you know if you structure a deep neural network or a generalized adversarial network in this way, it's faster and better and and generally they've done that on, GPUs or graphical processing units. And so then if you're like, if you really want to eke out performance, you customize a new chip that's designed to run just that framework really quickly. Well, that's great. Except now you're producing a ton of chips for which have significant environmental impacts, just for one type of machine learning application. And as soon as the statisticians come up with a new, better way, which we know they're going to, because that's what they do, then we're going to have to design another chip, and all those other the previous chips are going to be obsolete. So one of the things that Microsoft has done is gone a different way. Instead of designing these customized chips, we've been pursuing an approach using FPGAs, or field programmable gate arrays, and you can kind of think about this as programmable silicon. Right. So now we have chips that you can program the silicon to be optimized for the machine learning algorithm that you're running. And then when you come up with a different framework, you can customize the silicon for that without the manufacturing process, which is so problematic. Okay, that's not all, but that's some of the infrastructure side of things. Then I would argue that we need to separate out kind of this academic mentality of machine learning with a more utilitarian aspect of machine learning. So if you look at the run times for these algorithms, the 80-20 rule is a significant underestimate. Like you can get 95% of the accuracy that they're getting in, orders of magnitude less time. It's always the tail end, right? And so, from an academic perspective, sure, like winning a contest by improving an algorithm for accuracy from 98.6 to 98.72 is maybe useful. Like, how useful is that? When you think about the energy, when you think about the resources that went into it, et cetera, et cetera. And we do need we need a better weighting system for people to take those considerations into account. I mean, in public health, it's not that different. It's like, well, okay, what does 0.02% improvement mean? I mean, it probably will mean one person whose diagnosis is missed. Or it may be 5 people that got a treatment that they shouldn't have gotten, right? In those terms, you can, in the human health space, we can oftentimes get it down to a specific event, we're still not very good as a society at pricing that event, right? Because we don't like to have conversations about the price of human life for good reason. But in the environmental side of things, we still need a better kind of economic framework for how we say, you know, how long these things run for. There's interesting academic work going on in this space. I wouldn't say I have any like mind-blowing answers. I would say we do think a lot about the ethics of all of these things. If you want my super short kind of answer in the way I kind of drive the team on this issue is most of the time, good is good enough. Right. And if you do that, I think you just chop off, you know, a large part of the density distribution of the run times on these things. So.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Vasilis, you have a question?
No, I'm going to give the room first to the students if we have any other question from the students.
Hi, Professor Joppa, I have a question. I have had an idea for AI in cattle farming. Are you familiar with Joel Salatin, rather? You know who that is? He's a very famous cattle farmer, and what he focuses on is rotational grazing and the impact multi-species rotational grazing can have on carbon sequestration in the soil. Okay. Really interesting guy. If you're at all interested in the field, he's an excellent communicator on that. So his thesis in raising healthy cows that best facilitate human health is that you should be a grass farmer, not a cattle farmer, and that the cattle are just an accessory event with a high sell price. Yeah. So to that end, what you do is you put an intense amount of pressure on a particular region, and then once that has reached a critical stage, you move the cows off and you let that piece of land rest for a while. So what I was sort of interested in is very few of us work at Microsoft and you know, if you have an idea that you wanted to explore like that, I have a background in computer science. I know Python pretty well, but my AI work is well, my professors in college would say that it's about a C-level job. But anyway, where would one go to sort of explore these notions? I mean, I can write it down on paper all day long, but if I wanted to bring it out into the world, what's a good first step for this kind of thing?
So visit the AI for Earth website. There's a super easy application process to kind of like write it down. It's like a page or less, right? And get it in front of us. So that's the easiest way to do it. We do actually work, some of these rotational grazing, you know, ideas are really kind of classic optimization, you know, spatially constrained optimization problems. And we do have a couple of them in our portfolio actually, because one of the reasons is, you know, you mentioned it, we know that soil carbon sequestration represents one of the most significant, you know, pools of nature-based carbon removal out there. But the devil's in the details in how do you actually run these operations to maximize that sequestration, to your point, so that you're a grass farmer with a high financial yield kind of cow sitting on top of it. But yeah, short answer to your question is, reach out through that. There's an online form. You just write your idea down and that gets it in front of the AI Earth team.
Actually, so Lucas, go ahead, Brady.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say if you know, if my idea is similar to ones in the portfolio and it gets denied for some other reason, do you have another avenue that you would take? Like go check out this guy on YouTube. He does a good job of explaining this kind of thing, or? Yeah,
well, one of the things that we like to do is we can help connect you up with other people that are in this, that we know are doing interesting stuff in this space. I mean, that's one of the things that we want to be as good as possible at, is making those connections between like-minded researchers, because to exactly your point.
Well,
Yeah,
thank you very
and
much. I appreciate it.
actually, I just want to tell you, Lucas, we're going to get back in touch with you with Brady. Brady is one of our students, and he is working on a very interesting, I would say, outstanding idea of biomonitoring environmental pollution using his honeybees. So we'll be in touch with that.
Very good. Cool.
And any other questions from the students? Okay, I also want to tell you, we have also the Connecticut Agriculture Experimental Station attending your seminar, and we also have Dr. Mourelatos from Greece, who is also working on mosquito surveillance of viruses.
Very good.
I don't know, do you guys have any question? Is Jason or Spiros, do you have any questions? I don't know, probably they might not be able to hear me. So, oh, hold on.
Yeah, hi, this is
Nicole. Yeah, I was reading your question. Go ahead, Nicole.
okay. Sorry, I'm having some technical issues, but thank you so much for this talk. I just had a question, kind of like a philosophical question. You know, I was struck by your story about your first job was kind of to think about computing needs 50 years out, and this type of vision is really important. When I was thinking about the contrast to the academic process, where we're often thinking about like a 3 or 5 year grant or, you know, a dissertation, which is just on the shorter term. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts or ideas about strategies for how you can, you know, all of us can really, you know, think big picture, think long term, you know, how that's done in the corporate, you know, in the industry innovation setting.
Yeah, well, I don't think anybody does a great job of this. You know, I wouldn't put Microsoft up on a pedestal. I'd say that we try, and sometimes it works. I think, you know, we one of the things that's really depressing about it all is that you try to think 50 years out, but you realize that you're like incapable of thinking that far out. Basically, you know, you think it's 50, but it's really 10. I think there's probably a little bit of like a Schrodinger's cat issue here, which is that as soon as you start thinking about it, it's not 50 years out anymore because you're thinking about it. But which is not what Schrodinger is talking about with this cat, but you get my point. So yeah, I would just say that the perspective I always have is, well, where's all this gonna go? Right. That's the way I kind of approach this the way to think about 50 years is like, well, if you just kind of look at the geometry of the problem, where is the shape of it forcing it to go? Maybe it's 50 years out, maybe it's 100 years out, I don't know. But then what can I do to, and either do I want that to happen? And if so, what do I need to do to accelerate the timeline? Right? How do I need to, what are the things that I can do? What are the investments I can make? What are the research, you know, investigations that I can pursue that will mean that if it is 50 years out, it'll only be 25. If it's 25, it'll only be 10. And that's the way I kind of try to structure everything. I mean, we have this weird thing in you know, the private sector of like, got to figure out the return on investment, right? And so one of the return on investments that we're always looking for, and this is something that's constantly championed by a colleague of mine named Dan Morris, who runs our AI First team now, is basically time to result. You know, like if we make this investment, we want to cut down the time for this land use planner to run an optimization. We want to cut it in half. We want to cut it, you know, by 3/4, et cetera. And so we always put those time constraints as our goal. Like we just want to have the time it takes to get the job done. And I think it's helpful to expand that out to your own personal kind of goals, as well as like, look, this is going to happen anyway. I just want to have the time that it takes for us to get there. and then to kind of align with that. But I have to run now because I'm now late for talking with somebody else. But I really have enjoyed the conversation, although I did most of the talking. So hopefully the next time we find ourselves together, I can do less of the talking and I can do more of the learning.
And hope that the next time will be in person.